Okay, the major ways that we warm babies are two different devices. There's the incubator and the warmer, and you should just be aware of how these work. So uh, an incubator is the most natural way to warm a baby, but it has limited access. And so we often put new babies or babies that are sick on warmer beds just because you can get you have immediate access to the baby. In an incubator, you have to go through a portal, and sometimes there's some constraints in terms of your ability to get great access, particularly for procedures, to the baby. The heat source is totally different. So in an incubator, you're heated by warmed air that flows over the baby. So you're heated by convection, and you lose energy to radiation and evaporation. And in the warmer bed, you are heated by radiation, and you lose energy by convection as the air is passed over you, and by evaporation. So these work almost in opposite ways. Insensible water loss, in general, is much lower in an incubator, particularly if you humidify the incubator. So a humidified incubator may create an environment that has very little water loss in a baby. You can't really mimic that on a warmer bed. You could try to enclose the baby in some way, put a blanket on them, or put emollients on the baby's skin. But in general, water loss will be high on a radiant warmer and will be lower, and maybe even very low, in an incubator. And of course, the environment of the baby, as we talked about in the very beginning, includes how the baby is nested and the baby's access to noises. And so incubators can be designed and are designed to be to potentially be darker, to be quieter, and you have much more limitation in terms of your ability to change the environment on a warmer bed. So these are all considerations, and as you weigh the pros and cons of incubation versus radiant warming, most will find that a radiant warmer has limited advantages, and most babies are better nurtured in an incubator. So our strategy is to move them as quickly as possible to an incubator, and the more preterm baby, the more rapidly we want to move the baby over to an incubator. All of our babies start off in radiant warmers. There are some nurseries that have perfected mechanisms of just putting the baby right into an incubator. And there are other nurseries that like to manage babies in warmers for longer periods of time. These should be considerations for you. Now let's talk just briefly about weaning. Weaning of the incubator is a challenge that is usually met by the nursing staff. They often have protocols. We don't really have studies on how well those protocols are followed or how well those protocols work, but every nursing team seems to have their own approach to weaning the incubator and to when the baby should come out of the incubator. We actually did a study. Roy Schneiderman recently published a study in Journal of Perinatology that looked at the variability across the country in terms of when babies came out of the incubator. And we found some really remarkable results, and that is a huge variation, and I would call it an unwarranted variation, in weaning babies out of the incubator. So some nurseries and some babies were weaned out at 1,500 grams, and some babies were weaned out at 2,500 grams. And you can see the percentage of weaning of babies out of incubator in this slide in the purple bars. So most babies are weaned out between 1,700 and 1,900 grams, but again, huge variation. And what we found was that there are nurseries that absolutely will not wean a baby out until they get to be 2 kilos. Some nurseries won't start weaning until they're 1,800 grams. And these variations are really based on folklore and tradition more than science at all. So the question we posed was, how does this impact, the weaning of an incubator, impact on the outcome of the baby? And there are theories going in, to be transparent. Some of us felt that if you wean slowly, the baby will gain weight better and will stay in the nursery for a shorter period of time. So if you push a baby out at 1,600 grams, they'll be cold, there'll be struggles, they may get sick, and the length of stay would go up. And others felt the sooner you wean a baby out of the incubator, the better the baby would do, because the baby would be sensed to be more mature and behaving better. So the question was, would a nursing team or a mother treat the baby more normally at 1,600 grams out of the incubator? Would they feed better? Would they grow better because they're being nurtured differently? And this is a real question that Alere, which was the company that sponsored this particular study, was looking at to come up with protocols and guidelines. And what we found was something that was really interesting as depicted in this slide. And quite frankly, it was not what I expected the result to be. Again, in this paper published by Schneiderman in Journal of Perinatology this year. And that is that as you weaned at greater and greater weights, what we found was that in the solid line, that the weight gain per day was less. So they actually gained weight less if they stayed in the incubator longer. And the dotted line said they went to full PO later. So it took them longer to go to, the heavier they are when they weaned out of the incubator, the longer it took them to go to PO feeds, the longer they stayed in the nursery, and the less weight gain they gained each day. And so the people that had thought that a baby in an incubator is sort of treated as being sicker and therefore stayed longer and weren't nippled as often and didn't gain his weight because of that as well, won this debate, which was thousands of babies that we looked at across the country. And so the variability, the unwanted variability in how we wean is an important consideration for you in the management of babies. And it's something that there should be a team that takes an active look at when a baby is ready to wean and when a baby is not, and how to wean them once you decide that they're ready to wean. We also looked at in this study babies that failed to wean adequately. So the babies that we took out of an incubator and had to put in, and frankly we couldn't find an area that was a breaking point. So it looked like there's some babies that nurseries that are very successful at weaning babies out at 1,600 grams, and some nurseries that just weren't, and or babies that weren't, and you couldn't predict where a great gestational age or birth weight was. There have been studies done in the past that looked at 1,800 grams as a cutoff, and that's an area that I intuitively use as an area where most babies should come out at 1,800 grams. They should be able to handle that, but that's not the very solid science yet. I can't really come up with a number for you, but I think the overall point of this this study was that we probably could come out in some nurseries earlier, and this should be a big attention point for the care of these babies. So in looking at baby girl L, who now is 2 years old, just turned 2, she's about 1.5 in this picture. She had humidity in an incubator for 14 days, and she weaned out of the crib at 1,800 grams. Very sort of standard approach to the care of babies in our particular nursery. We keep them in, as I said before, 14 days of humidity in the incubator for a period of time until we think they're ready based on some parameters, how well they look, how well they're handling their temperature changes. And about 1,800 grams, we get very aggressive, and that's what she did and went home.